Hello, welcome back to my channel. In today's episode of Wearing Clothes That Barely Fit Me, we are going to be talking about the medbikini hashtag and mainly the study that prompted it. And if you don't know what this is or you need more context, that's okay, we're going to get to that. I just have a couple things I want to preface this video with. Firstly is that the study we're going to be talking about has been retracted. It was retracted on July 26th. Yes, this is pretty old news. And before that, it was pre-published in December of 2019. Additionally, two of the study's authors have apparently posted apologies. I could only actually find an apology from one author, but I do want to put it out there that the people involved with this study appear to have realized its shortcomings. Now, we can probably start to get into what I'm actually talking about. That would be the study called Prevalence of Unprofessional Social Media Content Among Young Vascular Surgeons. And this is a paper that was published with the stated purpose to evaluate the extent of unprofessional social media content among recent vascular surgery fellows and residents. And the authors of this paper reasoned that searching social media for potentially unprofessional content from young surgeons was necessary because it could help account for patient choice in hospitals and see if maybe because supposedly unprofessional content was posted by employees of a certain hospital, patients would avoid bringing their business there. Firstly, who cares? Let's just get that out of the way. I think there are a number of issues facing not only our healthcare system overall, but even I would say I'm not a vascular surgeon. I don't know very much about that whole world, but I would go so far as to say that that's probably not even the biggest issue facing vascular surgeons. And secondly, the idea of male authors, yes, there is one woman involved in the study, I believe, but all the people actually doing the social media trawling were men. The idea of men stalking younger people's accounts for revealing photos is pretty uncomfortable. However, as Dr. Elizabeth Bick points out on her blog Science Integrity Digest, the study is not without precedent. A 2014 study led by University of Nebraska researchers and another 2017 study of urologists both laid the framework for this one because they had very similar purposes. And what, you probably ask, is the precedent for these studies? Well, I would answer sexism and an increasingly blurred line between work and personal life. So one of the study's authors, Thomas Cheng, wrote in a Twitter apology, which I appreciate him taking the time to personally apologize. Some foresight would have been appreciated, but better late than never, kind of like this video. Anyways, he wrote that they intended to empower surgeons to be aware of the effect that posting certain content on social media could have. And nice use of a social justice buzzword to justify your creepy study. Again, thanks for the apology. I'm glad we have come to an agreement. But I thought that was pretty ironic. And in the study itself, the authors assert that publicly available social media content may affect patient choice of physician, hospital, and medical facility. As noted by many doctors on social media, investigating healthcare workers' social media accounts may be helpful in, for example, if you're trying to prevent HIPAA violations, which occur when doctors or other professionals post patient information on social media without consent. But this particular study definitely took a turn away from the noble protection of medical ethics and into the dubiously subjective. As Andrew Helmers writes on the American Journal of Bioethics blog, there are several limitations of the study is the only statement in this paper I can agree with. And please read his blog post as well for a good laugh, or five. But regarding the author's decision to label alcohol consumption or depiction as inappropriate, for example, how could they tell whether or not a picture drink is alcohol? And who would consider a glass of champagne at a wedding party inappropriate, you know? The subjectivity of the study is one of its fatal flaws, in addition to its actual violation of Committee on Publication Ethics guidelines regarding use of a vascular surgery directory. But we'll get to that. The study also deemed content discussing controversial social topics to be potentially offensive. And this is a very insidious choice, given that many quote-unquote controversial social topics, including vaccines, abortion, and health insurance, are directly the terrain of healthcare professionals. Not to mention, the study itself mentions controversial topics. How does policing off work attire sound? Anyways, apparently, wearing inappropriate or offensive attire is also potentially offensive. However, and I can't believe I have to say this, we can't expect surgeons to be professionally dressed at all times, including on social media. It's completely unreasonable to expect trainee surgeons to draw no boundaries between their very intense and emotionally taxing work and private lives. Now, the study made a point of looking at how many of these accounts had vascular surgeon or something similar written in their bio, but also in real life we don't walk around with badges that like say our occupation on them, and we can't expect our employees, for example, to be representative of not only the company or the hospital or the whatever that they work for, but also the field overall. We can't expect that from them every time they go and do something publicly. And it goes without saying that inappropriate or offensive is a very subjective metric that often punishes curvier body types and women in general when it is applied to the revealingness of clothes, and it's an even dicier metric when it comes to politics, because we all have our own ideas of what is and isn't an appropriate topic to discuss in public. Anyways, nobody is safe from getting their attire deemed unsuitable anyways. You only need to look as far as headscarf bans that are sweeping Europe and the way female skin is demonized in dress code stateside to tell that there's simply no way for women to please everybody when it comes to dressing appropriately. In fact, this part of the study was so ridiculously subjective that it did spawn the medbikini hashtag that swept through Twitter and Instagram mainly, where doctors would show pictures of themselves wearing so-called inappropriate attire, usually swimwear, along with explanations of why this had absolutely no bearing on their professional abilities. For example, they would add their credentials, their awards, what they're proud of doing as physicians, or whatever other profession they have. It was great. We love to see the positivity, and without that hashtag, we probably wouldn't have this conversation at all. The study would have just been retracted in private, and that would be the end of it. So now that we have a better understanding of why that part of the study and its premise was offensive, we should probably talk about why the methods were so offensive, because as I mentioned earlier, there was actually a code of ethics violation lurking within there. And essentially, male researchers trawled Instagram, Facebook, and Twitter, and they looked through 480 accounts from vascular surgeon trainees on the job market for clearly and potentially inappropriate content. And they did this by making social media accounts specifically for the study, and then going through the directory again. This was a very inappropriate use of the directory, but they went through it and looked for people who might fit the demographic, and they would look them up on social media. More than a quarter of the accounts that they did find had unprofessional content, but we don't really care about the results because they're meaningless. They're meaningless because the metric of appropriacy that was used is meaningless. And this is a very basic argument. I'm just gonna put it out there anyway. We learn very early on in science education that writing, for example, a 9th grade lab report, you have to be specific enough when discussing your methods that other people can replicate it. And this study, it's just not possible to replicate it because of the metrics that were used. So that's kind of part of what leads me to label it bad science, because it's so subjective when science is supposed to be more kind of data-based. And the study's designated screeners were also from the same demographics. They were male and 28, 33, and 37 years old respectively, which is bound to result in a bias. For example, last year is the first year that my school allowed leggings to be worn as pants. Now, I'm 17. People of my demographic, a little bit older and a lot younger, overwhelmingly see athleisure as a completely normal style. However, I have definitely heard comments from older people that wearing leggings as pants is highly inappropriate and that they're too revealing. I don't agree with this, but it's something that I've heard. And I would imagine that the same is true for a lot of these men. They're older than the people that they are investigating, and so they might find something inappropriate, but the people actually posting things and even some of those people's patients may not see anything wrong with it. And I do think that there's an age divide when it comes to social media use generally. I'm going to be frank here, I think a lot of older people don't necessarily understand the exact purpose of social media. As this study may suggest, it's not necessarily everyone goes on Instagram to become an influencer. Some people just want to show snapshots of their daily life with friends and family, etc., etc. And I'm not saying this to defend clearly, for example, clearly illegal behavior posted on social media, but I do think that it should have been taken into account more. I do appreciate that the study's authors included noting how many accounts put, vascular surgeon or something similar in their bios, but that these are not LinkedIn accounts. These are personal social media accounts that are not necessarily meant as, putting your best foot forward or whatever the saying is, but they can have a variety of purposes, and it's not always to attract patients to your hospital. We also have to remember that what you see on someone's social media is you're probably not going to have a lot of context for it. It might be meant for a more personal circle of friends that will understand it better than you would. It might be exaggerated for comedic effect. Who knows? You just have to take everything with a grain of salt and, to a certain extent, assume positive intent. And the researchers, as mentioned, provided very little explanation for what constituted inappropriate attire, obvious intoxication, and more of their red flags. And there are some things that we can probably guess would be indicative of obvious intoxication, and you might be able to make the argument that, well, if it looks like you're obviously intoxicated, even if you're not, you shouldn't post it. But anyways, because the screeners came from such similar demographics and their criteria were left very obscure, it's super unlikely that the study would have ever come in handy, even if it wasn't retracted. So I want to close by reminding you all that while this paper may appear to be a clear-cut example of discrimination and bad science, sometimes our judgments are not so obvious, and there are plenty of more insidious ways that discrimination can infiltrate publications, and we have to be on the lookout. And even in professional settings, it's honestly just as likely that people will take you less seriously because of your gender or race as it is that people will take you less seriously because they saw you brunching with friends and drinking mimosas on social media one time. And that this paper was approved and went under the radar for so long speaks to the failure of both institutional review boards, which determined the ethicality of a proposed study before it proceeds, and researchers alike to determine the ethicality and appropriateness of anything beyond female swimwear. We are very lucky that, unlike the 2014 and 2017 studies before it, doctors on social media were more than happy to call this one out. So if you participated in the medbikini hashtag or in the backlash against this study, thank you guys so much. It's very important for bringing awareness to the rest of us non-doctors and non-medical fellows. So thank you guys for watching. I hope you liked this one. Also, I have seen some more subscribers, some more friendly faces joining the community. And thank you guys for supporting me. I really appreciate that. But I'm gonna just leave this here. Goodbye.